Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Veriff Voices. This is the podcast where we talk about fraud, compliance, technology, and all things related to digital identity and returning trust to the internet. We've got a very interesting episode today with digging into some very recent fraud research, and actually it's the third time that we've had a representative of Cifas on with us today. So this is quite notable. We've never had any other guests come on with so much repetition. So this is great to hear, and I think digging into this research is going to be really interesting, actually. So the guest today is Rachael Tiffen, who is a director of Cifas, and I think Rachael, I'm going to hand over to you. I think it's better you introduce yourself than I do. Just give us a bit of a rundown of your background, your experience, and what your role is at Cifas too.
Yeah, sure. Great. Yeah, so I'm Rachael Tiffen. I'm Director of Public Sector and Learning at Cifas, which means I work with our public sector clients and stakeholders. And I also manage our Learning Academy where we deliver training and courses. I've got about 35 years background in counter fraud. It's a really long time. And I've worked in various different organisations. My background is public sector. So I did work at the Home Office and the Ministry of Defence and some other organisations. Before I came to Cifas, I've been at Cifas 8 years now.
The Cifas and Veriff partnership is one that people who listen to this podcast will know about. But just in case people are joining us for the first time, just give us a bit of a sort of a rundown on what Cifas is, what you guys do, and how you help businesses in this sort of the fraud area.
Yeah, sure. So Cifas is the UK's leading fraud prevention service. We've been in existence about 37 years. Well, yeah, around 37 years. And we're a not-for-profit membership organisation. We've got 800 membership organisations, and they range from banking, retail, insurance, telecoms, and technology sectors. We're private and public. So we're truly cross-sector. And we enable the sharing of data and intelligence between public, private and the third sector to help protect people and businesses from fraud. We operate two databases, the National Fraud Database and the Insider Threat Database. And we have, we'd say, the largest holding of fraud risk data in the UK. And we're a mission-driven organisation. As I say, we're a not-for-profit, and we are focused on reducing the harm caused by fraud. And our data, you will see it because it informs the national crime figures, and we collaborate and work closely with law enforcement. Last year, 2024, we helped our members prevent more than 2.1 billion in fraud losses. So some quite nice figures there.
That's a big number to be throwing around. I like that, and the work you guys do is remarkable, actually. So many people that I talk to on this podcast who are sort of working in the fraud area themselves at financial services companies and elsewhere as well. They all say that they see the sharing of information as being the sort of the biggest route to preventing fraud in the future. And I think you guys, the way you're set up is certainly kind of evidence of that already, actually. And I think it's great that the work that you do. Let's dig into your research then, because I think this is what we came here to talk about. I know the Fraudscape report is kind of is a big piece of work that you guys do. Tell us a bit about that, first of all, about the sort of the research, and then I think it was described in there that fraud is currently sort of a national emergency in the UK. Give us a sense of just sort of how serious that situation is in 2025 compared to maybe previous years, and let's start with that.
Yeah, so Fraudscape is our document that comes out every year, and we also do a 6-monthly update. So you will see it around about April, and then we'll do an update during the year. And indeed, we're seeing it as a national emergency. The figures are pretty high. So so that Fraudscape is built from our membership information, things that are filed into our databases, and also some of the trends and patterns that we see from our intelligence work, from our organised fraud threat intelligence groups. So fraud is now accounting for about 43% of all crime in the UK. That's just a massive figure, isn't it? And we've also seen that fraudsters have stolen about 11.4 billion in 2024. Also a really massive figure. So it's continuing continuing to escalate. And within our databases, we've recorded over 217,000 cases to the National Fraud Database. That's one of those two. In the first half of 2025, and it's a record-breaking figure, so it's higher than the previous years. And what we can see from Fraudscape, the 6 monthly report, is that it's continuing to grow. It's driven by economic pressures, normalised first-party fraud, risky consumer behaviour, and obviously AI, which I think we'll probably touch upon at some point, but also identity fraud, which is remaining as the largest threat. So we had last year in 2024, we had 249,000 cases. This year, in the 6 monthly report, it's showing 118,000. So, and some of those are being kind of facilitated by synthetic identities and fabricated AI-driven profiles. So it's really quite interesting to kind of see some of those figures. So we're also seeing some trends on people selling identities for financial gain, exposing themselves to identity loss and all sorts of liability for like fraudulent loans and credit. But we've just done our learning survey, and I've been talking this morning on those, and we had survey about 2,000 people and asked them about behaviours. And one of the things that has come out of that was 1 in 8 people admitted sharing company login data for money. So there's some really, really interesting sort of things that are happening, which I think challenge the norms and behaviour. So we have seen in Fraudscape that the insider threat rose to 32% of 160 cases. So insider threat is really kind of quite key to it's one of the areas that we see quite a lot of trends in. And also we've seen efforts to conceal personal details and employment background, including false references. And that learning survey that I was talking about, we've actually seen 1 in 5 people admitted to having submitted false references or using false information on their CVs. So there's a real pattern sort of developing there, I think.
Yeah, I think and the real value of this kind of research that you guys do, and that it kind of actually means some of the findings you there kind of echo the research we've done over the last 12 months as well, which is kind of reassuring that we're finding the same things, I suppose, although not so reassuring that it's the scale of the problem. But no, you're right, and I think that it's kind of these evolving patterns that you start to see, and when one door is closed off because technology catches up and is able to stop a certain type of fraud, you see others opening, and we'll get into some of those later on, certainly around AI and the insider threat as well, because I think they're both really, really important. But the one number that jumped out to me there was the one where you said, I think it was 43% of all fraud, of all crime was fraud related in the UK last year, which is mind blowing. It really is. I mean, that's nearly half of all crime that we see. And I think that I guess the question that sort of follows up from that is do you think the current legislation, current sort of regulation is sort of keeping pace with the fraud landscape, or do you think that there is more that could be done?
Well, and the government's taking it really seriously, and the kind of responses changed quite significantly. And there's so much happening in respect of legislation and trying to prevent some of the things. But as you say, it's all changing so fast, and people are finding new ways to commit fraud. And there's so much more to be done. But we could do with the government setting very clear priorities and objectives for industry. And we ought, obviously, cross-sector data sharing is like really, really important. We do have the UK's first fraud minister. So there's some activity to provide coordination. And also you'll have seen some of the legislation around the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which came into play in 2023, but most recently in September, the failure to prevent fraud offence, which is part of that act, came into effect on the 1st of September. So a lot of people are taking actions in respect of that. There's also the Online Safety Act, and the government is introducing, it's going through Parliament at the moment, it's called I have to get it right because it's quite a long title, Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Act.
Well done.
And sits within the Public Sector Fraud Authority, but it's going to give them a lot more powers to take action against fraud. It's been going through Parliament all year. But I think really it's so important for us to keep abreast of it all, because the rapid evolution of fraud tactics, especially AI, insider threats, and the cross sector targeting means that we have to be agile and proactive. I've heard so many conversations recently where people talk about this thing called polygamous working, and where there are people who've got multiple contracts, not just in the private sector, not just in the public sector, not just in the third sector, but across all of them, which means that we have to be ready to act on all of those things. And we have to have, robust data and be sharing intelligence across sectors, so much better. There's also the stuff that's happening with Companies House to enforce mandatory identity verification, which is coming into place on the 18th of November. So cleaning up the Companies House register and the directors, and making sure that people verify names and identities in a really robust way.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth us elaborating on that, actually, because I think that's kind of, a lot of what we've seen, is the types of fraud that we see, for example, can often be solved, but they're not sort of, it's not an insurmountable problem. Actually, like, sort of a bit of a mealy way of getting to the question, but I think it's, there are the means and mechanisms in place to verify people sort of digitally, for example. I mean, obviously Veriff offers that service as one of the few, many things that we do. So it's the means are out there, and I think it's almost sort of a mindset shift, isn't it? I think around that. And it'd be great. Do you want to just dig in a little bit more into the Companies House piece, because I think that's quite a telling piece of it's quite a telling move, I think, in terms of starting to bring this kind of level of verification into the sort of the public setting, as it were.
Yeah, it's a bit of a landmark reform, actually. So again, it's part of this Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, and basically, Companies House are enforcing mandatory identity verification for directors and persons with significant control. We call them PSCs, and what it's aiming to do is strengthen the trust in the UK's corporate ecosystem, and reducing fraud by ensuring that the individuals behind companies are who they say they are. So the rules actually apply to new directors, existing directors, and these persons with significant control. And you can do the verification via one login, gov.uk, or through an authorised corporate service provider, ACSPs. And it's really about fraud prevention. It's a fraud prevention measure. So we've sort of got a bit involved in it, because my academy team have been providing identity verification training for people to meet the standard. And the standard is called Good Practice Guide 45, written by the Home Office. It's about identity checks. And it provides an outline, a sort of framework for identity checking, evidence strength, passport, driving license, validation about, is the document genuine, does it belong to the person? And as I said, that comes into play on the 18th of November. So it's quite a big thing that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's, as I say, a very timely type sort of piece of legislation, I would say, or addition to a piece of legislation, and something that Veriff is kind of very heavily involved in. I think we've got an idea here around exactly what you were saying, is that so that businesses in any sector, really, this goes beyond the sort of Companies House piece, I suppose, but they have to do, three things essentially. They need to sort of, make sure that the person is genuine, that they genuinely exist, and you can match them against a database that their passport, exists on, and so on. That they are, that they can be trusted as well, that they are a sort of a person that doesn't have a record of misbehavior on the internet or in platforms and things like that, and that those two things can be repeated again and again and again every time that person logs into a platform. So it's one of those things that that trust is an ongoing sort of piece there, and I think it kind of echoes, I think, what you were just saying there around what it is that piece of legislation is trying to do. So I think that's definitely a positive step, and great to see the government doing that. I just want to switch tack slightly into the AI piece, because that's obviously the the topic of the day. It feels like we've been talking about very little else for about the last year or so. I would say maybe even longer than that actually. So, and I know that your report really sort of found a sort of quite startling increase in sort of AI being used by fraudsters particularly. So, do you just want to run us through how exactly they are doing that? How are they using artificial intelligence to enable identity fraud and bypass verification systems and so on?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So basically, AI has kind of supercharged the fraud threat. So, for example, there are some figures. 680% year on year increase on synthetic voice fraud, 26% increase on total fraud attempts. Um, and I think we see that AI has made fraud faster, slicker, and it's so much harder to detect. And we're facing a new level of threat that demands urgent action. And basically, we have to move at pace because criminals are using it at pace and with ease. And also, they're generating high quality fake documentation, impersonating brands, impersonating authorities, and individuals in a really convincing way. And also, we've seen examples where they're using it to automate social engineering tactics so that scams are more scalable and believable. And the tools that allow them to do it, they can bypass traditional verification systems and exploit all sorts of vulnerabilities in digital platforms. So it's almost like fraud is becoming a service industry with criminals selling AI powered toolkits on the dark web and making it really easy for anyone to launch a convincing scam. But I guess, we would say that whilst AI is part of the problem, it's also part of the solution. And banks and businesses, well, we need to continue to use it to fight fraud kind of smarter and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I think I've seen, or the research we've done has shown, is that the AI has kind of moved the threat a little bit as well. I think that and actually, I think the stat you brought out there about the rise in voice fraud probably confirms this as well. I think previously banks were the kind of first and last target, or financial services company because that's where the money was. But I think fraudsters have got wise to that now, and I think banks and financial services companies have improved. They've got better with the systems that they're using, and so now I think it does seem that fraudsters are targeting people sort of a couple of links in the chain before that. So it might be via a social media platform or a dating platform or something like that, where they can sort of get access to somebody without having to go through the sort of rigorous fraud prevention that financial services companies have. But they're doing so in order to start the process that will eventually let that person access their banking accounts or whatever it may be. So and I think it's a joined up process, and I think that shows to me more than anything else that it's not just financial services companies that need to be aware of this threat and that need to be doing something about it. I think that any business, and this probably goes to virtually all businesses these days that has a digital presence, then is remotely onboarding customers and remotely servicing customers, needs to have these things in place, because otherwise you're kind of just opening up a threat vector that previously wasn't there.
Yeah, there is something about protecting yourself, isn't there, as an individual? There's some like that. There are so many kind of horror stories that you can tell, but I'll just tell you one actually about because as the fraudsters are using deepfake technology to take advantage of individuals and victims, pretending that they're real people. So one example that I've seen, not a Cifas case, but of someone who believed that they were in a 2-year relationship, and the fraudster had used deepfake technology during a video call to steal £350,000 from her. And she met him on a dating site. He'd even proposed to her with a photo which had been digitally altered, showing a sign of with a man with a sign saying, "Will you marry me?" Just lots of stories just like that, and it is getting very difficult to kind of tell them apart from real people.
Yeah, it is, and it's heartbreaking. And I think, as well as, the figure of, anybody losing £350,000 is of course terrible. But what you don't see with that is the kind of emotional impact and the psychological impact of that sort of incident. And
Yeah.
I
How
always
it
feel very,
affects you afterwards, you know.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And we've had sort of victims of fraud on this podcast, actually, sort of telling. And so some of the stories about how they felt just duped, and how they felt just so stupid, and that they couldn't talk to people about it, and they felt that they were being judged for being the victim of fraud, were honestly just heartbreaking. And I think that's a very good anecdote to share, actually, because I think it sort of illustrates the problem going beyond the financial, really, which is, obviously we talk a lot about the business element to it on this podcast, but I think that there is a human element to it, which I think is sometimes overlooked, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So onto that talking about humans, I think, with moving track slightly again, you mentioned right at the beginning there, sort of one of the more sort of disturbing trends was this piece about people selling their own identities. I mean, we've spoken a little bit here about people sort of unwittingly giving them up, but there's a trend, or seems to be a gathering a little bit of pace around people just doing this not only willingly but for money, or for other sort of benefits and things like that too. So first of all, I suppose, why are people doing this? And what are the kind of the longer term consequences, I suppose, of those who fall into this trap?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, we've seen our Cifas members, reported more than, as I said, 118,000 cases of ID fraud this year. So there is a concern about how it's rising, and also that people are selling their own identities for financial gain. I mean, obviously, I mentioned that thing a bit earlier about people selling their company logins for financial gain. And it could be done willingly, or it could be done through coercion, but they're exposing themselves to identity loss, and all sorts of liabilities. And it can also be linked to money muling, which also is a concern for us, for our 800 odd organisations. And we are seeing instances of money muling, sort of the behaviour of money muling within our database. And it could be economic hardship. We talk about the financial, kind of cost of living crisis, or it could be, people who are, unhappy at work. And we talk about the fraud triangle a bit, don't we? So it could
Yeah.
be something to do with that, or it could be, a lack of awareness about what they're doing. But there are long-term consequences to it, which could be criminal records, being blacklisted from financial services, or loss of employment opportunity. So if somebody's lied about their identity and they end up being filed on our database because they've submitted a false CV or something, they may not get employed by somebody else. It's a possibility. So there are some consequences for doing that.
Yeah, I think it's so. I mean, your identity is so precious, and I think it's one of those things that, especially moving. Well, we're already living in a digital world, I suppose, but the more
Yeah,
that our world becomes digital, the more precious that becomes, because it becomes very hard to verify if you're not doing so in
yeah.
person, right? If you're not actually there in the building, or whatever
Mm,
it may be. So, it seems to be. Well, I don't know, maybe a bit of a generalization here, but so, the misuse of bank accounts, for money muling, as you mentioned there, it seems to be something that younger people are falling victim to, and maybe don't fully understand the preciousness of their identity. Is that something
yeah.
that you agree with, that your research has shown as well?
Yeah, the research is showing that we actually have a page on our CIFAS website about child financial harms and advice for young people on how not to get caught out by this. But
Mm.
57% of the subjects recorded into our national fraud database are still under 30. So they are young people. And, they do get targeted because of financial vulnerability, social media exposure, and a lack of awareness. So I think we've seen 16,000 cases indicative of money muling activity. So it's a reduction on the previous year, but it's still quite a high figure. So it's still a concern, and members do mention it to us. So it is a key concern.
Yeah, it really is a kind of, it's a very sort of insidious problem as well, this money muling thing. I think it's probably presented to people as an opportunity when they first hear about it, by the fraudsters who are reaching out to these people who are, willing to sell their identities and so on. Do you want us to give us a little bit more information as to what it actually is, and how the money muling process kind of unfolds?
Yeah, I mean, the other day I was talking somewhere and somebody actually said, "Oh, well, what is it? Does it really, does it really matter? Is it of some importance?" But I think it's, people might not think that it's doing any harm, but obviously I'm talking about the consequences. But it can be linked to money laundering. I mean, that's probably one of the main things. And it does facilitate money laundering. There's hiding the trail, where the money mules are a crucial link, obscuring the connection between the criminal's original activity, illegal activity, and the funds. And they move it through various accounts, making it hard for law enforcement to trace the origin of the money. And it means that the criminals can maintain a form of anonymity, keeping them separate from the financial transactions. The person who's holding the money in their bank account, it could be a student or a young person, they may not realise where they are in that process. Hence, we're trying to raise awareness of it, and they might just think that it's about easy money, but it could have longer term consequences. And also, participating in money muling and money laundering could constitute a criminal offence. So, there could be something further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're sort of, I mean, jumping back across so many topics, because I don't want there's so much we want to squeeze in today. But I know that the other thing that I would like to talk about is insider fraud, because I think that that's something that, again, came out sort of as a big kind of growing threat, I suppose you'd call it, within your research that you guys did. And I'd love to know kind of what kind of insider fraud are organisations seeing, and why is it becoming so prevalent now, do you think?
Well, I think some of it is to do with the cost of living pressures and remote working. There's that famous story about the person who was running several contracts, and one of them, he'd actually just got the mouse attached to a robot vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
So it looked like he was working all day. But insider threat cases rose by 32%, and there's several different types that we've seen: dishonest actions for financial gain, false employment, and data threat. I was talking a bit earlier about our learning survey. You can read the full research on our website, but there's some quite interesting behaviours sitting behind that. Well, I'll give you some stats in a second. But one of the things that we are seeing is polygamous working, which is what we call working multiple jobs secretly and using fraudulent reference houses. They're kind of emerging threat, but we're kind of seeing them more increasingly. And in the fraud survey, the learning survey, we've seen a fifth of UK people have lied on their CVs in order to land a job. But also in the learning survey, there are some stats on business owners and the C-suite, and 88% of business owners and 70% of the C-suite said that they thought that some sort of unlawful behaviours within this area were actually justifiable. So there's something quite interesting happening there about what's becoming the accepted norm, and maybe some urgency around changing cultures within organisations. But we've seen a lot of issues about, in our learning survey, 24% of people said that they committed expenses for fraud. So that's quite serious, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, I think it's what's sort of interesting about this, especially, I know we'll talk a little bit more about the polygamous working in a moment, but I think that historically, Veriff, for example, has kind of the people that we've dealt with on the customer side of things are in these kind of fraud prevention teams. They're very sort of customer facing. That's the world that they operate in. This kind of shifts things slightly to a different team, almost the HR team, the recruitment team, the people team, whatever you want to call it. And I would argue that those teams aren't always fully equipped to deal with fraud in the same way that a dedicated fraud team would be, because for obvious reasons, they think about other things and so on. So it's kind of, in some ways, it's an untested area for fraudsters to try to exploit, isn't it? And an sort of unprotected area. So I can kind of see the logic of why they're trying there, and it is. Again, it's a very sort of insidious threat. We're working with a number of sort of big digital businesses here at Veriff that are quite often targeted by state-sponsored hackers, for example, who are trying to find jobs within organisations so they can get access to IP or access to financial data and so on, that they can try to make money for the country that they come from and use it for whatever purpose. So it's a big threat. It's got sort of sort of echoes of big sort of spy scandals and things like that about it. But I think it can, and
Mm.
really, I would say that any business that is accepting remote workers is at threat here. It's not just limited to financial services companies or the big tech providers, or the types of the big targets that you would think of there. I mean, anyone really could be a threat here. So let's talk a little bit more about this sort of the polygamous working, for example. Then can you kind of explain exactly what it is, what the process is that somebody would go through, and how they might impact a business and its hiring process?
So basically, polygamous working is someone who's working multiple contracts. Could be one, could be two, could be. I heard of someone the other day who was running 14, and it's conceal conflicts of interest or income sources. I mean, they might not really be working for you. I'm not quite sure how you'd roll down 14 jobs at one time. And it can be linked to fraudulent reference houses. They're fake entities who provide false employment histories and CVs. And it does hit everybody. So I have seen cases where it's hitting all sectors and somewhere where they're targeting, an individual type. I've seen quite a few in local authorities and the NHS, but that's probably just because I work with them quite a lot. But there's an interesting case that's actually going through court at the moment, which is a senior civil servant, and he had you can look this up on the internet actually, but he had 4 jobs: one in the Home Office, one at DEFRA, one at the Department of Health, and one at a London council, all at the same time. And he's been charged with 9 counts of fraud over a 3-year period, waiting sentencing. So there's quite a few examples of it happening. But I guess, I mean, it's so important to check people before you employ them. And obviously, people do HR checks. But some of the people that use Cifas and use our insider threat database, for example, they do the Cifas check after the HR check, and then they find that person has actually been filed in our database for something that HR didn't actually pick up. So it's so important to think about how you doing your proper due diligence on identity, and does the person really have the qualifications, or is the CV completely correct? Obviously I said I work with the public sector quite a lot, but imagine if you were employing a social worker and they gave you a false qualification and then you're sending them out into people's homes. That's not just you've employed the wrong person, that's, your public service to people who are in genuine need of support. And you could be sending someone out who doesn't even have the qualification. So there's so many repercussions to that.
Yeah, yeah, it does sound a bit, but it's I say it's one of a few problems, if you like, that we've spoken about today. What do you think are some of the answers to this? I suppose, and that's the sort of the way that we can wrap this up. So just as a sort of final question, I think the report talks a lot about the need for cross sector collaboration. We mentioned it right in the beginning, actually, and I think it's something that comes up, with the work that we do with customers as well. We have our cross linking system that the Veriff uses is kind of, if we spot somebody doing some fraudulent action in against one customer, then all of our customers are protected because that person is kind of flagged and that IP address is flagged and so on, and we can kind of keep things out that way, which is kind of a behind the scenes collaboration. But I think what you were talking about and what was talked about in the report is something a lot more kind of open, I suppose, and something that has been talked about a lot, but is quite hard to bring into practice, I think. So what does effective collaboration look like, and where are the current gaps, would you say?
So I think effective collaboration is really about uh, working cross sector, real time data, intelligence sharing, joint intelligence operations, and uniting your fraud prevention strategies. And no one's got the complete picture. So the thing is about don't work in isolation, but work with partners and across sectors. Use technology, but also check things, yourself. So it's a really good time for us in terms of kind of building things up. And if you were to look at that failure to prevent fraud offence, there's a list there of reasonable procedures that you can put in place that involve risk management and due diligence, and the things that you do at Veriff using our identity, our insider threat database, and working together to share data is probably the answer to all of that, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. There's almost a safety in numbers type approach, isn't there? And I think, and we've sort of talked about a fraud prevention ecosystem where, Veriff is a tool that can solve a solution, a set of solutions that can solve some problems, but not all of them. And I think that it's important that, your sort of fraud prevention strategy acknowledges that and has tools that are specific to each particular sort of type of fraud that come in. And, and we've sort of mentioned already today a number of different types and sort of tactics that fraudsters are using. They're constantly evolving, and I think that's that's the sort of the key takeaway with it, I think, and that AI has kind of accelerated that and has really sort of highlighted it, I suppose. But
I mean, sitting underneath that is training, obviously, because you need to
oh,
train
absolutely,
staff
yes, yeah.
to recognise when it's those things, and to do sort of the investigations legally and do the checks legally. So it probably sits underneath all of that.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And I know you mentioned at the beginning sort of how much that you had saved businesses over the course of the year,
Yeah.
but you also mentioned how much what was still lost to fraud. So there's still plenty of
Yeah.
work to be done, isn't there? I
Oh,
think, and
definitely.
it's one of those things that it will be great to check in with you again, later this year when the sort of the updates, your reports come out, and
Yeah.
and next year too, because I think.
Have a different person from Cifas next
Well,
time.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. It's great to hear, some different voices about it. But I think, ultimately the argument is the same, right? Is the fraud's increasing, and that we need to sort of be acting on it now. And it is a hard problem to solve, but I think the tools are out there, and I think the way you approach it is the right way to do it. And as you say, sort of sharing information feels like it's the way, a way to sort of crack this nut, so to speak.
Yeah.
Nice one. Okay. Well, look, we are out of time. I mean, Rachel, that was great. We covered so much, so much information in there. So that was really, really good. So thank you for your time. I know you're incredibly busy, and the work that you guys do there is incredibly important. And we're sort of, very much sort of indebted to you for your time today. So thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you next time. This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.